Well, imagine if you could ditch the pipeline roller coaster, the one that makes it completely unpredictable how each and every quarter is going to end up or how the fiscal year is going to end up. As a CMO, I've had that background that you talked about there. Companies can, achieve lots of different milestones. I've seen, the $100 million mark. I've seen an IPO, at a $2 billion mark. I've also seen the sale to private equity. And so, one of the things I always think about is this notion of predictability, because you can't really grow what you can't predict. And so, I know it's sort of sometimes considered the holy grail of what marketing can do, and can we really actually achieve it? But it is achievable.
There are secrets out there, guys, performance marketing secrets, and knowing just one or two of them can absolutely light up your funnels. Let's go. This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI-driven performance agency that makes you smarter. What is one of your big secrets to success?
Well, imagine if you could ditch the pipeline roller coaster, the one that makes it completely unpredictable how each and every quarter is going to end up or how the fiscal year is going to end up. As a CMO, I've had that background that you talked about there. Companies can, achieve lots of different milestones. I've seen, the $100 million mark. I've seen an IPO, at a $2 billion mark. I've also seen the sale to private equity. And so, one of the things I always think about is this notion of predictability, because you can't really grow what you can't predict. And so, I know it's sort of sometimes considered the holy grail of what marketing can do, and can we really actually achieve it? But it is achievable. And I think of it from my background. I've been a coach in baseball for basically all of my kids over the last 10 years, and I think the analogy is appropriate that baseball is an incredibly difficult sport. Hitting is one of the hardest things to do of all sport. And you can want your kid to hit the ball harder, but if your kid doesn't have a level swing, it doesn't matter how hard they swing. You have to level out the swing. And so when I think about pipeline, I think about that predictability. I think about that consistency of motion and finding a way to know what is the baseline that you can build off it. And so that's why it becomes such a key ingredient. So I want to go into that. But I also thought, there's another side to the marketing equation as a CMO that I think is very important when you talk about a secret sauce. And I think there's also this notion of humility. And I think the best CMOs always are some of the most humble CMOs. We can't fix everything. And I also think that there's another notion around business savviness. As a marketer, the most important element, especially as you come up through the ranks and you become a CMO, is to understand that you're part of a broader ecosystem of activities. And it's when everything fires on all cylinders that you're going to actually find the kind of business success the organization's trying to strive for. The other thing we know about marketers, as well as all marketing departments, whether the largest in the world and best funded or the smallest, there are an unlimited number of projects. And so the best CMOs are humble enough to know they can't fix everything. They're also humble enough to know how they fit into the organization, and they can identify the project with their finite resources to have the most meaningful impact in the organization. And I think that's a really important part of a secret sauce outside of what I would talk about, predictable pipeline.
Yeah.
And,
Well, let's, if you don't mind, let's unpack those two things one at a time.
Yeah.
And I think maybe let's start with the humility piece and the piece about understanding, where you fit into an org, and maybe about prioritizing, where you sit. I'd love to hear a story, and I mean, we have many clients. I've seen many, impossible scenarios, but is there a story that comes to mind for you where you've really just felt that humility feeling, or you've really just surrendered almost to this thing where I do everything, guys, I need your help too. How did that play out in your experience?
And I think that gets back to the core of marketing. One of the biggest challenges in marketing is that it is such a diverse range of activities that you have so many types of specialists within the organization. People grow up through demand gen, brand, content. There's so many paths to a leadership position out of marketing, and they are so distinctly different. I mean, it's from, the surgeon to the anesthesiologist to the, they sure, they can speak some medical language, but they're also highly specialized in what they do. And I think that it's not intentional, but I think that marketers in general, when they're growing up through that, they've never been put into that vaulted position of discussing necessarily the overall impact they're trying to achieve for the business. They try to impact their craft, and they become very, very impactful at it. If you're the demand gen person, you know the numbers, you understand the pipeline. If you're the product marketer, you understand the positioning and the competitive strengths. And when you get the humble moment, I think, as CMO or VP of marketing, the first time you're ever vaulted into a situation where no one understands your language at the table. And it's usually the first board meeting, and you realize how much you have to break things down into the most simplistic of components. And then it's the moment when you also realize that point I brought up about the firing on all cylinders kicks in, which is it doesn't matter what your lead volumes are, even your lead quality. If you're not building pipeline, if pipeline's not turning into revenue, nobody's going to give you credit for anything, right? And so the humility comes right then and there at that moment. And so one of the things I've always, I think you kind of fit in my background, but one of the things I've prided myself in is being more of an athletic marketer, if you will. I grew up coming into Deloitte Consulting. I was an Oracle ERP consultant. Then I went into IT and I was a program manager. Then I got my MBA and became a marketer. I've never actually worked in the same software vertical twice. I've been in legal tech. I've been in HR tech. I've been in collaboration workplace software. And so one of the things I've always focused on my career is constantly broadening everything I do to give myself the most perspective, if you will, on what it takes for businesses to be successful. To me, that's where my passion lies. Marketing is just the instrument that I love the most, the creativity behind marketing, to impact that.
Wow. You are dropping some fire here, John. Like, there's so much to unpack here. I love this concept of athletic marketer. I've never heard that term before, but I mean, I kind of get a sense of what you mean by it. Is that synonymous with broadening your horizons, or like, what do you mean exactly when you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that I juxtapose it is against being an operator. When I think about athleticism, I think about the fact that if you see somebody who's a swim star or a track, somebody runs track, you see like 5% of their work output, right? When they're at the race, you don't see the 95% in the gym with the trainers and all the conditioning and all the things they do to prepare. And I think of the athleticism as that, like, just constantly pushing myself with boundaries that go far beyond what a historical marketer would do. And I think it made me really well suited for a CMO position. It was what kind of gave me that ability to jump in there. And even though I had to have that humility moment, I understood business at a fundamental level. And I felt very comfortable understanding how to draw the different strengths of marketing together without necessarily having participated in all of them at a deep level. And conversely, the operator side, I think that one of the things I find as a CMO that's the hardest is when the business results aren't where they're supposed to be. And, somebody in marketing did their job perfectly, right? They executed the best brand campaign. They executed the lead gen program, whatever it might be. A lot of those individuals, they sometimes don't fully understand that although it was great work, the business struggles to recognize those types of activities because they didn't result in the ultimate outcome of the business. And so that's what I kind of juxtapose as the difference, because that's what causes that whoa big moment when you start to kind of move up the ranks and you start to realize, wow, it's not about what you might call like a vanity metric, right? Something like, oh, wow, we got a lot of X or a lot of Y. Well, did it result in anything? And if it didn't, the only people that care about it are the marketers.
Yeah. So I want to talk in a second about that moment where you were humbled, where you were the only one, like you were at the table and you were the only one speaking your language, and you had to figure out like how to position it in a way that the other stakeholders understood. But before we get there, I would love if you talked a little bit more about the most predictable pipeline you've ever seen. Just like whether you are the CMO or not, like what is the most predictable pipeline that you've ever seen, and what were they doing like really well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are obviously a wide range of contributing factors to a pipeline, and so you might even ask me the question, well, doesn't sales own pipeline, right? I think sales and marketing very much jointly own pipeline.
Yeah.
I think marketing can create a lot of stability and provide a lot of support and confidence for like SDRs to do their jobs and get the meetings for the account executives, for example.
Mhm.
The most predictable pipeline that I've seen from a marketing campaign generation perspective is something that we've done at Betterworks, and it took a lot of thought. So when I got to Betterworks, we wanted to look at the question of the brand and who we were, and really what did this company stand for? What was its existence about? And we realized that it's really about making work better for all employees. And so the tagline became "Make Work Better." And "Make Work Better" was meant to be very much a declarative statement. Okay, so you can make work better if you want to fill it in, versus us telling them what to go do. We were telling them to go do it, if you will. It's a little bit more the lines of like Nike and "just do it," if you will, from a tagline perspective. And from there, when we were sitting around thinking about it, we thought about, how do you activate a brand like that? And we came to, what do you have to do to make work better? Well, you have to address the fundamentals of what people need. And so we came up with this idea of people fundamental. And this is 2 years ago. I've been at Betterworks for about 2.5 years now. It was about 2 years ago, so it was very early on. And so we came up with this idea of people fundamental. And we talked about, what is it that people fundamentally need in their jobs to be successful? Things like feeling heard, transparency. And the whole shtick around it was that I could speak to it from a standpoint of like, these don't change no matter what. Technology changes in the workplace, policies change in the workplace, but if you don't address things like people feeling heard, people having growth trajectories, people being able to contribute to something they feel aligned to that matters to the company, you've lost the person, right? And it was an undisputable set of items that we came up with that were these fundamentals. And so we started with a podcast, or sorry, a podcast. We started with a webinar series, but we called it People Fundamentals. And we decided to have some very strict, if you will, kind of policies around it. It wasn't a sale of Betterworks, is to give as much as possible to the HR community, who we sell to with Betterworks. And so we would only bring thought leaders on, and we would not overly advertise who Betterworks is. And we immediately started jumping numbers from webinars. When I got to the company, where usually about 100 people would register, to registrations as high as 3,000 for 1 month's webinar. And we're like, whoa, that's, 100 to 3,000 is kind of a big jump. And what I realized is we had created a sub brand for the company. We created something that people found valuable, that they could emotionally connect with, not just intellectually connect with. And they kept coming back. We were getting a 30% return rate. We were getting 70% new each time. And we started running these almost every month. Well, then it became this natural mechanism to turn it into a podcast. And then we created a LinkedIn newsletter. And the LinkedIn newsletter got 11,000 subscribers on LinkedIn from HR people in the first 6 months. And it just speaks to the power of brand and this big challenge related to how marketing, I think more than ever, to cut through any of the noise out there, has to connect on two different levels. One is the emotional level, and the other one is the rational side of what you're trying to say to them. So that's sort of, and so what I've been able to do with that kind of a thing when I talk about predictability is really realistically that the engine started working itself. There wasn't the question of like, will they show up, or could they show up, or what does it look like if they show up? I've hit the 30 to 40 to 45%, attendance rate mark every single time. We don't even question it. We stopped measuring how many HR people come. We used to be like, well, will HR people come, or do random people come? And it suddenly became, wait, it's like at 90%. So it's like, don't even need to measure it anymore. So all the measures started falling down to just the core element of like, looking at it from a standpoint of being a pipeline generating activity, and starting to move more into, looking downstream, what is the influence of this activity on pipeline?
Yeah.
And that's a predictability thing. I didn't have to wake up every day wondering how I was going to generate the next 2,000 leads.
Hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours, even if you're already a client. If you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision. So it sounded like a big part of the secret there was you shifted your perspective to how can I help? How can we serve? How can we take timeless principles and basically like sort of educate the market in a way, in a very non-salesy way, which is huge. I mean, to go from 100 registrations to 3,000, that's 30x. That's unheard of.
Well, and you know what, one of the things I really do love about my job, and I sort of intentionally, it's in selecting to work, going to Betterworks was, working with human resources people, what I love about their job, despite some of the challenges they have in their jobs, which is a very hard job, they're responsible for the entire workforce. And if you broaden the view of what they are capable of doing, they're capable of making everybody's, day a place where they feel productive and effective and everything. So back to what you're talking about there's so many human elements to the marketing. It's almost like you're bringing B2B enterprise to consumer marketing and the psychology behind it. And so the people fundamentals concept really hits on a lot of the kind of the empathetic components of how you reach somebody's feelings about what they do. And so the audience I market to inspires me. And that makes it a lot easier to come up with brand ideas and how to reach them. And authenticity, it's pretty obvious if you're being authentic or not in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you guys start translating that into pipeline, right? Because there's a sort of a fine line between educating and enriching and then kind of becoming salesy a little bit. Like, was it like the first 5 in the series was just pure education and pure value, and then you started in a subtle way incorporating some sales messaging into it? Or like, how did you think about that and approach it?
That's a great question. And it actually happened right around the point that you mentioned about 5 or so in. It's like, that's great. Okay. Now you got tons of people watching you. What are you going to do with them? Yeah. And so obviously we now had them as, somebody who's in learning mode in our database, and we could, they would see advertising for other activities, and, we could take them into what you call more like middle funnel content to educate them and try to draw them into demos. But we also did hit that inflection point of the webinar series. And so I held pretty strong to my principles on giving more than asking in return. We did start to introduce a little bit of an infomercial for 2 minutes up front. And we also did dabble in going down into some webinars that got a little more specific with exactly what we do. And of course, you saw the numbers drop in attendance as a consequence.
Yeah.
So what I did was I was like, no, that's not what this is about. I'm not, the worst thing you can do is tarnish something that you've made shiny and beautiful, right? Like it's working if it was planned, and brands don't operate in a way that you can just like, they're not origami. You can't just change the shape, a couple more parts around here. So what we did was we decided to create a parallel track and create what we call a Betterworks webinar. And a Betterworks webinar was defined as something that would be a lot more specific, a lot more middle to lower funnel kind of activity where somebody's getting core education about something that actually involves activating and doing the work and using a product like ours and such. And so we started running those and we innovation webinars and all of those types of things in parallel, and we could cross market the two and we could draw out of that crowd who was interested in it. That way I retained my People Fundamentals brand as relatively pure and pristine, and was able to also execute against what the company ultimately wanted, which was pipeline.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And you would expect that the attendance rate would be lower, but it's like a dual track thing. It's like, hey, if you're here to learn, come to this webinar. If you would like to learn a little bit more about this, come to that webinar. It's almost like a funnel in a way.
Well, and yeah, and I mean, I think there's enough science behind it that we all know that about 70% of a buying journey is now completed before any requested contact occurs from the prospect, right? That's a pretty standard B2B metric that's been measured by many different organizations. And I think that the thing that we have to remember is we can't make them want to buy something we're selling. We have to meet them at the moment, right? And so I wanted to nail down the meet them at the moment when they're just learners and they're just experiencing things and they want, you're getting your name out there. And then I wanted to meet the moment with, okay, you really actually are thinking about doing something practical. You've hit that, what you might call a zero moment of truth, where it's like, I've got to do something. I gotta do something now. And so if you appreciate the fact that you are not actually persuading them to buy, but rather you are meeting them at the moment and where they are, when that moment occurs, we know that the other stat is that most people end up buying the first contact vendor they go to. It's true with over 50%. So you want to be there and you want to be the trusted partner at that point in time.
Yeah, that's an amazing insight and an amazing seg, because I find myself thinking, okay, in the case of Betterworks, and I want to learn more about Betterworks, but you guys are in the performance management business, it's a people business. There's inherently a lot of emotion tied to that you can tap into. I'm thinking about sort of the more boring businesses, maybe not a total commodity business, but suppose that you're a data center or an automation platform or a marketing agency like we are, right? Is there still like some emotional lever you think that can be tapped into in most any business? Or is in that case, is it more just like, informational and educational only without any emotional pull?
That is a great question. My last company at Intap, we were able to take the company public. Software is focused on automation of middle office type of activities within law firms, professional services firms, consulting. And okay, so it's not blow your hair back kind of stuff. Like,
Right.
It's like compliance software and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Incredibly lucrative software because you have to have it. But, you argue, is there a lot of emotion there or not? And I'd say there always is emotion available. I think it's harder. I think you have to work really hard at getting to the real spirit of what you're doing. When you extrapolate what Intap was doing and you think about it, one of the things that we're talking about in this space was enterprise level. So we're talking about the biggest law firms, the biggest consultancies in the world. These are some of the smartest human beings on earth. And they take a lot of pride in their craft. So the worst thing you can ever do to a person like that is put them in a position where they are in the dark as to how well the account is doing, or if they can start the job because the compliance check isn't over. So we were able to get down to that core nugget of like, look, these are individuals that never want to be caught off guard. They want to feel in control. And yet there's a massive amount of hundreds of clients, massive amount of information going on everywhere. They can't be everywhere all the time. And the idea that you could use generative AI technologies to actually inform and nudge them along to help them be prepared. We got it to the point where things like they could be driving to a client and they would get an email. It would summarize every last interaction with the client onto the detail.
Wow.
That put them in control. Oh, Other than that, they might have not even known who the last person is that touched a client. And so putting them in the know became the thing that we understood was the thing we could actually promise to them by connecting their entire office with intel. And so it was harder. It was definitely harder. I think with HR, it's a little easier to understand their direct impact on the world, and how it hits their emotional heartstrings. But that's what I love about marketing, right? Not always easy. Sometimes it's incredibly abstract work to get to that right answer.
Well, you're very impressive in a lot of ways. One of the things that I'm most impressed by is just sort of how you're navigating these various dualities, right? Like on the one side, you're revenue driven to the core, and you've learned that, it sounds like, through the school of hard knocks, that you have to be revenue driven really to succeed in any capacity in the CMO role. But on the other hand, I've heard you talk about emotion and brands and things like humility, right? But you really have this interesting spectrum. It's a very broad spectrum. I'm curious how you navigate specifically between brand and the way people feel about your company and that revenue driven mode. Like, and you can talk to me about your experience coming up. I'll tell you, like, I came from the school of direct response, where it was like brand didn't really matter. It was about the offer, the headline, the copy, grab them by the eyeballs and pull them in, with something that just sounds totally different. And then they can learn about the brand later. But how do you navigate those two things? Like leading a big team where, you've got probably a brand team and you've got product people and copywriters, but then you've got a board and you've got a CEO who's like brass tacks, bare knuckle, like, show me the pipeline. How do you make a case for something like the webinar initiative that you proposed? Like, before it was a success, it sounds like it was a success as of now, and it's proven. But how do you make the case and the investment for that in a scenario where the CEO or the board might call it sort of touchy-feely and, get more to the brass tacks?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that it's even more so. You always hear, brand is kind of that third rail for the CMO, right? No, I'm going to do a brand initiative, and then they poof, their job's gone 6 months later, and it because it doesn't, quote, have the attribution necessary to
Right.
support it. And I think that it's interesting. I've actually not really exactly thought about what you're. It's a bit innate for me, so I haven't actually thought about it the way that you just phrased it. To be candid. I think that I don't separate the two. And maybe part of it is because when I got my MBA and I was switching into marketing from IT, which is a very unusual thing to do, I went into a marketing agency first. And it was very brand forward. I had incredible clients like Skype and Cisco, and I had so much exposure to the brand side of things that I gained a profound respect for, because if one thing was I self-selected out and realized I'm not a brand strategist.
Yeah.
I am not, and I never will be, because I don't have that creativity engine at that level in my head. And the ones that were the best creative directors, I would just be wow. I'm like, how do you reduce this big mess of stuff to this most simple thing and make it sound so good? And so I always really appreciated it. But I think that that by not separating the two, what I don't do is I don't walk in and say, I've got a brand campaign. I walk in with a concept that's going to generate business. And I know in the back of my head what I'm going to do to make the brand come forward in it. I think it also gets to this notion of orchestration. I don't think the CMO or CRO are the driving force of pipeline. I think we're the orchestrators of it, right? We bring together the people, the process, the technology, in a way that maximizes everything we have at our disposal. And so I just always look at the whole of it, and I'm very protective of the brand. Like I'm like a hawk on it. Like I can just see it when I don't feel like something resonates the way it's supposed to be in line. And maybe that's the trick to it, in terms of what you do to get those brand initiatives forward. With generative AI, it is absolutely ever more important to be addressing brand. It is what's going to allow people to see you.
Yeah. And that's really good. I mean, that's great. That's like, and that's what I'm growing to believe, because I've been inducted at this point into the school of brand, and I've seen the power of it in our own clients, to the tune where, like, regional window company looking to expand from the East Coast, like sort of to the Midwest, their cost per acquisition in the home markets is beautiful, very low, very profitable. You try to turn on a market like Cleveland, Ohio or something, and it's night and day. Like, it's just exorbitant. It's too expensive. It's not possible. But if you run some TV or some radio or some CTV or even some YouTube for a couple months leading up to like the paid search campaign, again, like night and day, then all of a sudden it becomes doable and profitable. So I've seen that firsthand, and I'm starting to, you know, veer more into that direction. But I like your concept of, hey, just don't distinguish between the two. Don't differentiate. Like, bring forth brand ideas. Here's what I heard you say, like, bring forth branded ideas that position the brand the way that you want it to be positioned, but then also have some sort of a monetization mechanism, in view somewhere.
And to what you talk about the advertising there, I mean, we don't do TV, but in the 2.5 years I've been here, cost per lead is down almost 70%. And there are some really good aspects of what we did to fine tune the literal engine, LinkedIn, paid advertising, Google, Bing, all that. But I attribute at least half of the reduction to the brand. People are clicking quicker, faster, in a more agile manner because they're starting to recognize what we're throwing out at them, and they're believing it's of high value and they trust it. And yeah, sure, brute force, you can get people to click, but you're going to be up in the thousands per click. And so I've absolutely seen it on the digital marketing side, what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's really interesting too. So when you're taking, or like when you're, say that your budget, whatever it is, say it's $100,000 a month, $500,000 a month, $10,000 a month, whatever. Are you distinguishing in your mind, like, hey, these are bottom funnel, like these need to be, the offer needs to be a case study or something mid funnel or bottom funnel? And like these ads, I'm not expecting anything in the way of conversion, but these ads I am. Like, are you making that distinction in your mind, or are you just like all your campaigns are sort of?
Yeah. So we definitely differentiate with, we focus on new contact acquisition. So we go after top of funnel. We certainly do try to have a good program for re-engaging or remarketing to folks we've gotten before. And in that, we try to convert those individuals into the bottom of the funnel hand raisers who go and say, I want a demo or get sales. That lowers the cost per action quite significantly. When we go out and market just for bottom of funnel and try to get the hand raiser right out of the market in enterprise, first of all, I think of it from one standpoint, I failed as a brand because I didn't get to that person before they're ready to they're at their 80th percent into the buying process. So now they don't know about us. The other part is it costs a ton to get. And as we know, you're less likely to win because you're coming late to the game and they already have trusted advisors out there. Yeah. So I try to do it with more of what you talked about there, with proportioning out different portions of the budget with different theories as to what you're doing in each action.
And then are you running ads to anything that's just totally ungated, like totally over funnel? Because you mentioned contact acquisition. Like, is there always a gate, like an email opt-in of some sort, or is it just sometimes totally ungated stuff?
I think that was one of the hardest things when I became a CMO, because the company, hired me with demand gen first in mind and product marketing second, even though I came from a product marketing background. And so I wanted to gate everything early on. And one of my biggest bets or actually probably the biggest bet I made here at the company was we didn't have proprietary content. I didn't think we had anything of value to give out. And so literally within 3 weeks of joining, I commissioned a study of over 2,000 people across the UK and the US. And we created this huge survey, and it took 6 months to build and actually get out into market. We call it the State of Performance Management Report. And in that process, I had no idea what was going to happen. If anybody would read it, download it, whatever. And it was pretty damn expensive too on the relative space. And since then, now we're on the 3rd edition, and we've had more than 10,000 downloads across the 3 reports, and it's been in almost every single deal cycle. Like there's not an account that buys from us that you don't see somebody downloading one of the versions of this report. But to what you asked about there, it took the team grabbing me by the arm and twisting it behind my back and pinching me a little bit to say, we got to start ungating. We got to start making it easier. Or, not everything's got to be lead form. And I was very grudgingly, slowly brought into the process. And what I think is really exciting from a marketing perspective and an innovation perspective is, especially with generative AI, again, you're going to get some basic AI overview answer from Google that's going to satisfy some people. You have to create engaging experiences. So what we did was we created a fully interactive version of our 3rd edition of the report. We only gave away maybe that 30% summary level of what's in it. And we still download if you want the full definitive report. And we've seen more than double the interaction engagement with our report because we just moved to an interactive model. So my team has convinced me now to start ungating, and I'm still going to be a little bit stodgy about it, but I think there's always that balance you want to strike between the two.
Really? Yeah. I call that the kind of gate.
The kind of gate. Yes. It's the
kind of gate, It's like you get them hooked in with some free stuff, and then you sort of kind of gate some parts of it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a word for that. I think it's like the whisper, or there is a word for that. I should know that, but I love that kind of gate. And I like signals also, because that creates signals where there's going to be some cohort that clicks on that thing where like they want to reveal that content, but they don't convert. Like they're not quite ready to put their, their email address in or whatever. So that creates a cohort, which, can be used in some of your campaigns. So that's brilliant.
Absolutely. PDFs give you no behavioral action at all, right? So, I love data. So that was one of the ways that you twist my arm into it. Like, John, you actually learn about what they want to do and what they want to read. So where they off and like, okay, fine, let's try this.
Do you guys build that interaction yourself, or do you use like a platform or a tool for the interactive content?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right on. You know the journey of a marketing department. So the first time we hand rolled it and built the whole thing ourselves, and it was late, just because it became more than we, it just became a lot to build, and it was beautiful. But then we realized there are tools out there, and we went with a vendor the next time around, and it had its limitations, but it also had the speed to market that we needed. Cause I was like, okay, well, if it takes 3 months to get the digital version of the report out after the PDFs, then we've really kind of lost the edge here.
Yeah. It takes a little too long.
Yeah.
I feel you. Well, this is amazing. I'm sure everybody listening is taking something away from this. If you're liking this, if you're enjoying this, why not share with a friend or drop a 5-star review for the Revenue Driven CMO podcast, wherever you get your pods. John, I could go for like another hour talking to you. I'm having so much fun. I know you probably have a hard stop here. I want to be cognizant of your time. I just want to ask one more question before we get to the lightning round. Is like, it sounds by all accounts, for all intents and purposes, like you guys are kicking ass and taking names at Betterworks. I'm on the site right now. It's a gorgeous site. It does a great job in terms of segmentation. Like I can tell you're getting a lot of signals on the back end, and you have probably the ability to create awesome audiences. Like you guys, it seems like, are on the bleeding edge, which is props to you and props to your team. I'm curious, like, what are the big challenges? I know it's not all wine and roses. Like, what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing now?
Well, my first predictable pipeline principle is really to be able to anticipate change. And we've all seen what generative AI has been doing, and it really took the world by storm. And so the notion of a zero-click search has been in front of us for a while now, right? It's been more theory than it has been science. It might it might still be more theory than science. And I would say that I've put that relatively front and center because, well, first of all, obviously it's going to have a profound impact on inbound lead. The other part of it, and I think it's an exciting part of it, is this kind of notion of kind of like a whole brand takeover approach to making sure that Google will represent you, right? And so knowing that now videos are going to be more important, that your reputation on third-party review sites are going to be more important because it's looking at reputable locations to get its opinion from. I looked at it as a challenge, but also kind of fun too for the team, because it really opens up the question of true integrated marketing and really addressing all the different experiential channels in which somebody wants to look at your brand.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Just to give you an idea of like how hard this has been, like, there was, I won't say which one, but one of the third-party review sites still had misclassified us as a company, and somehow they had attained being the result for Google. So Gemini was saying we were an HCM, which is a human capital management system, that's like Workday, which we are absolutely not. And nobody at the company would answer it. We said, could you please look at this article you wrote and please reclassify it? You are literally giving Google the wrong answer, and Google is just spitting it back out in generative AI answers. And nobody would. And I actually literally, the CEO and the board, after my team couldn't get through to them, and writes me back instantly, and get on the phone with them, and I explain our situation. He apologizes, and they changed it overnight. And like,
Wow.
it didn't take more than a few days for Google to actually it picked it up, and we were reclassified. But I'm bringing that up because what keeps me up at night, or the current challenge with this, is that was incredibly manually intensive. I had 3 people at marketing agency. I had people on my team, everybody reaching out. Nobody would answer us. We were all begging them. We'd written the copy even, like, please use this. We're not trying to cheat the system. This is just a description accurate of us.
Yeah.
And me going to the CEO, and then having a meeting with him to discuss what was going on. And so, what's going to be challenging from a brand and building perspective is generative AI. We're not going to know how to necessarily manipulate the results. And when I say that, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean, get them into an accurate setting. And we have to be really on top of this to not be, I guess, off the rails for a period of time.
Yeah. No, that is, I'm surprised and impressed that you are saying this. Most CMOs are a little bit behind the curve in this arena, but we have been on top of it because we're an SEO agency at heart. Like that was our founding service line. We call it SGE, the Search Generative Experience, which just rolled out. I mean, it's been in beta for some time, but it just rolled out, and it's starting to roll out like more globally, as the days tick by, with mixed results. But we've done a tremendous amount of research on it and done webinars, white papers. There are ways to not necessarily control it, but to influence it, just in general SEO. I'll share some of the links with you after this, and I'll also drop them in the show notes because there's, some really cutting edge research. Also, did you see the big leak? There was like thousands of internal Google API documents leaked just like yesterday.
I missed that. I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, Rand Fishkin wrote about it. They're still live on GitHub. Thousands of documents, but it reveals a lot of detail just about things that Google is doing or not doing. A lot of times they conflict with what they said that they would do or wouldn't do. I won't necessarily say that they were lying, because that's like a really strong word, but they were manipulating the narrative, and maybe not for evil reasons, maybe for legal reasons. Like there's different reasons that they might do it. we're writing up some analysis of it now, but I'll share some of those links with you too. But interesting that to hear that SEO is basically, very top of mind for you.
Oh, we've been building for this moment for 6 months. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, hey, I have really, really enjoyed this. I'd love to have you back sometime. I feel like we could keep riffing for like another hour. You've mentioned Gen AI a bunch. I'm so curious about what you guys are doing with it and how you guys are using it. But I know that you probably have to jump. We went off script a little bit for this. I didn't give you a chance to like properly introduce Betterworks. Like I want to give you a shot to say, so it's like, okay, you're not a work day, right? You made mention, but for folks that are listening that are not familiar with Betterworks or maybe somewhat familiar, like who's Betterworks for? Who's it designed for? What's it do?
Yeah, it's a talent and performance management solution that really modernizes the process. And it's built around this fundamental that I think we all know, that the performance review is kind of largely one of the most hated experiences an employee will ever have, often demoralizing, being assigned a number that means nothing to anyone out there and tying it to compensation, and doing it based on one conversation at the end of a year. It has never worked. It's the backwards looking process. It's punitive in nature. It puts a manager who typically has none of the training necessary to do it in a very awkward spot. And so we moved to more of what is agile and lightweight kind of goal setting that can be changed and modified as time goes by. We know nobody's goals stay the same for a period, like a quarter, half year, or a year. We use generative AI to suggest goals in it. We have conversations, feedback, recognition, all wrapped into one. And so what's really cool now is with generative AI, we've already introduced the ability to help the manager. We can nudge them along. We can help them to write an accurate performance review. It's still human controlled. It's still a human narrative, but they are able to get that past that kind of, blank page syndrome of, well, what did happen? And also not the expectation that they actually know everything that happened in an employee's life for the last 6 months. And we're moving into things like being able to uncover kind of some of the things that have been largely invisible at organizations, which is like, who is all your key talent and what are the skills they have and how do you map that to succession planning and all that. So we're really kind of a purpose-built talent and performance solution. We don't try to do, a lot of the compliance-driven HR processes that the Workdays and the SuccessFactors and payroll, all those types of technologies that we're not focused on. We focus on all of the things that relate to the employee and manager being more effective every single day in how they operate together and independently, and try to fuel a team's productivity to the next level.
I see. So this would basically run alongside a Workday or like some kind of.
It enhances the tech stack, the HR tech stack. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, I'm really impressed by you, personally and professionally, as a leader, as a marketer, as just an all-around awesome person, and very, very impressed with Betterworks and with the team. So I thank you very kindly for being on the show. I hope you'll come back someday. There probably are some listeners right now who want to learn more about you, or maybe connect with you personally, or maybe learn more about Betterworks. Where would you direct them?
Yeah. Well, Betterworks.com would be the place to learn about Betterworks, and then reaching out to me. I'm very active in LinkedIn, so I love connecting and networking. So happy to talk to any marketers anytime.
Brilliant. Love it. Cool. We'll stay on the line just 1 second, John. We'll wrap, but for everybody else, that was another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO, and we hope to see you next time.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. even if you're already a client. If you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.